Welcome to Truth and Transcendence. You can find all the other episodes on truthandtranscendence.com. Today, I'm delighted to welcome special guest Mark Astor, who's here today to talk about, among other things, never giving up, which is such a strong notion. I'm very excited about exploring that with Mark. Mark is a co-founder and partner of Astor Simovich Law, which is a Florida-based firm dedicated to helping families navigate substance abuse and mental health crises. A former Palm Beach County prosecutor with decades of courtroom experience, Mark has handled thousands of cases ranging from misdemeanors to serious felonies. Mark focuses on legal intervention strategies, including the Marchman Act, Baker Act, and guardianship, to help families secure life-saving treatment for loved ones who cannot make that decision themselves. And you can find Mark at mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com, exactly what it says on the tin, and that will be in the show notes. So Mark, thank you so much for coming on the show.
So nice to be here. And it's it's funny, as I was hearing you talk, I said to myself, I've been in the US for 40 years, and when I was back in England last July, my friend said to me, "You sound very American." But my wife says to me, if I'm speaking to my mum or my sister, who have, like you are, very, have a very strong accent, she says to me, "You sound more English." So I'm thinking to myself, I wonder if I spend a little bit of time with Catherine, if I'll start to sound more English again. So, because you have a very beautiful, polished, you sound very British. So, I'm very happy to be here.
Thank you so much. So listeners, we can watch out. We can watch your accent. Is your accent going to kind of morph throughout the conversation between American and British sounding
It
as
just,
you go?
it might be. I tell people that my accent is like my hair. It is there, but it's definitely going. So, and
Very
I'm
good.
fighting the good fight with that too, by the way. So, it's all good. I'm fighting on all fronts here, Catherine.
Excellent. And remaining cheerful. So that actually brings us nicely onto our theme of not giving up. So we were talking about this, and I was asking you about, a bit more about the man, the man inside the attorney. And you were sharing with me that you've always had this kind of energy of never giving up. And so I just wanted to ask you, for the listeners who haven't met you yet, would you cast your mind back to your kind of earliest memory of you channeling that never giving up vibe, of you being that person?
Um, yeah, it's interesting. So, I obviously I grew up in the United Kingdom. I've been here in the United States since 1987. So that was right before my 21st birthday. And so now I'm 59 now. So I spent 2/3 of my life here, and I feel very blessed. I've had a good life. By all accounts, I was raised in a great family, but I come from somewhat humble beginnings. My dad left school at 14 and my mom at 16. So the idea of having a lawyer in the family was a very big deal. Just going to college was a big deal, getting a university degree. But, so I watched my father, who was an entrepreneur, build businesses. Some worked, some didn't, Catherine. Some made money, and towards the end of his life, it really devastated him financially, and also his health was, declined. Um, but there was many times where I watched my father, go to work. He'd, every day come home. And he'd fall asleep on the couch, still wearing his, shirt and tie and a jacket. And I think that really, rubbed on me, that the idea of work ethic. But my parents, but I was also, a kid who went to school and got bullied a lot. I was a small kid. So I think at some point I realized, when it comes to life, you either have to fight, you have to fight back, or you take it on the chin and sit on the floor and cry about it. And I think I decided that I wasn't going to sit on the floor and cry about it, and when I reached, 11 years ago, when I was pretty much broke. That's not fair. Not pretty much broke, was broke, right? And my father was in and out of hospital and I was sick, and I made a decision that, that I was going to build a business. I think that's when I really tapped into, that internal drive, And I told my stepson this, I think when it comes to life and entrepreneurship and that drive, that will, I think to a certain extent, I think there's two factors that are involved in that. Number one, y- to a certain extent, I think you either have that will, that drive, or you don't. And two, I think that if you are surrounded by the right people and you work on your mindset, so that takes a little bit of personal growth, which is a big part of my journey. If you have the right people around you, because iron sharpens iron, then I think there's a certain skill set that can be developed. So that was also a big part of my journey. Meeting somebody who got me to work on my mindset was very, very important. So it's been a long journey for me, Catherine. I mean, people look at me and say, "Oh, you're very successful," and my response is, "Well, that's great, and I appreciate the compliment, but I didn't really get my act together, both personally and professionally, until I was about 47 or 48 years of age."
Yeah.
And you're right, I have a storied history. I was a very successful prosecutor. I was one of the best trial lawyers in the state attorney's office. Um, but at 47, 48, I had nothing going on personally and nothing going on professionally. I was broke. I didn't have anything to show for it. I made a lot of silly mistakes, but it's part of my journey. So here we are.
And do you think that those, because it sounds like you're looking back and going, right, there were times when perhaps you weren't quite making the most intelligent decisions, right? Okay. And having difficult times. What did you learn through those times? Did that actually help you become who you are today in some way, or did it just feel like a detour?
Here's what. So I spent a year working for a personal growth company. Um, so I met the founder of this company at a breakfast meeting, and it was by pure chance that I ended up going. And I'm happy to talk about him and all that stuff. So there's a company in Miami. What they do is they teach lawyers the business side of practicing law. They teach you how to be an entrepreneurial lawyer, which is something they do not teach any law student at any law school in the country, right? What they do is, listen, I don't care if you went to Nova where I went in South Florida or same basic black letter law, right? You will take a similar type bar exam, you know, and that's it. But they don't teach you anything about actually running the business side of a law firm. And I got a chance to work for this guy for about a year. But what I didn't realize when I went to work for him was that what the company really is at their very core is a personal growth company. This guy he's the Tony Robbins of the legal profession. And they believe the personal growth has to precede financial growth. And I learned two important things while I was there. Number one, um, that I had failed to take 100% responsibility for my life, both personally and professionally. And number two, if I was going to open up my own business practicing law, I had to find a group of people that I could help. I had to have purpose. I had to have a real mission. And, back when I was prosecutor and I was making, next to nothing money because they don't pay government lawyers all that well here. Um, I had a real mission, especially when I was prosecuting violent felony offenders. And so I either had the victim of a violent crime or if it was a murder case, I had the family of a decedent. And I was able to give them real closure and a bit of justice. And that felt really good. So I had to get that feeling back, which means you got to find purpose. You got to find a group of people that you can help. You can't make it all about the money. I like material things too. And we all have to put food on the table, and that's okay. So what I did was I decided to put the mission first, and the money came. So I think having some growth, right, really taking responsibility and stop saying, well, it's their fault, or it's his fault, or it's her fault, or my marriage failed because this is my second marriage. My marriage failed because my ex-wife was this. The marriage failed in large part because of me, right? I was broke because of me. So I had to accept that, and so once you accept that and you have that growth, being around other people who don't take responsibility for their lives, you won't want to associate with those kinds of people, right? I have friends that I'm no longer friends with because all they do is cry and moan about the fact their life is this or their life is that. Well, that's because of the decisions you've made and you haven't taken responsibility for those decisions. And we all make bad decisions. That's how the universe tells you to go in a different direction, right? And so I think it's really about growth, taking responsibility, finding purpose, and then tapping into that inner drive, to make a difference in other people's lives, to grow a business, to have a better life, to take care of your family, to put food on the table, to help your staff put food on the table for their families. And I think when you do all those types of things, well, then success comes, right? So I probably rambled, but as lawyers, we charge by the word, not by the minute. So um, that's sort of my story in a nutshell, Catherine.
Thank you so much. That's fascinating. So it sounds like you kind of went in sort of waves of clarity around it. You know, when you were young, there was that thing of actually, no, I'm not going to give up. And
Yeah,
I think you told me you went to a private school, and I think
I did. I went to an all boys private school.
all boys private schools in the UK can be absolutely brutal, especially on
Yeah.
the smaller kids. You know,
Yeah. I mean, and I didn't do well in school. And of course, it was an old fashioned headmaster who, told my parents I was just not that smart and I wasn't going to do well. Um,
he was wrong.
he was wrong. And here's what I realized, there's the old saying, right? That hard work beats talent when talent don't work hard. So I said, okay, I may not be the sharpest tool in the shed, but I'll tell you one thing, I'll outwork anybody else. And even to this day, right, I still work 6, 7 days a week and, we have competition nipping at our heels. And I said to my wife, that's fine. I don't mind a little competition. I'll just outwork them. It's as simple as that. They'll always be playing catch up with me because I'll never allow them to outwork me, right? They start copying something I'm doing marketing, I'll do something different, right? They'll start copying that. I'll do something else. I'm always going to be one step ahead. I'm always going to outwork them. If we don't open up till 8:30 in the morning and a client calls at 7, I'm calling that client back. You know why? Because my competition's still in bed or on the weekends, like the long weekend, right? Well, my competition was sitting on the beach. You know what I did? I worked Memorial Day. I worked Saturday. I worked Sunday, and I worked most of Monday. While my competition took the day off, I worked, and so did some of my staff. Hard work beats talent when talent don't work hard.
Yeah. But I hope you're not grinding yourself into the ground though by doing that. How do you balance that
Yeah.
up?
Um, I think to a certain extent, Catherine, the whole idea of balance is
Nonsense.
uh it's a myth. It's a
Right.
myth made up by people who aren't willing to make the commitment. I'm sorry, that's the truth, right? I'm not gonna take and I said to my, when we talked about what are you gonna do for the long weekend, I said, I'm not taking 3 days off. I'm not doing that, I'm not going to take 3 days off. That's 3 days where we can't help people. That's 3 days where we can't make a difference and we can't grow the business, right? I'm not going to do that. Let my competition, they can shut down for 3 days, not me. I'm willing to do that. I think it's Dave Ramsey who says, live like nobody else. So one day you can live like nobody else, right? I'm willing to do the work now so that, 3 years, 5 years, 10 years down the road, I can take 3 days off because I didn't take 3 days off now, right? When we're still trying to grow our business, I'm still trying to put together enough so I can retire. And I'm willing to pay the price. You know why? Because 15, 20 years ago, I didn't pay the price. That's why I am where I am, which is fine. It's part of my journey. But had I paid the price 10 or 15 or 20 years ago, I don't know, maybe I wouldn't have appreciated it. I don't know. But I certainly would have been in a better position financially. But it is what it is. And it's part of my journey and it's part of my story. And I take responsibility for it. And that's okay.
I understand. Yeah. So it's you're doing that now because that is the right thing to do now, not because you think it will be the right thing to do forever.
Right.
Necessarily.
I mean, I'm going to be 60 in January. I don't want to be 70 years old and saying, I wish I'd have 10 years ago. I wish I'd have worked a little harder, or I wish I'd have been willing to work on the weekends so that I could take a week off or 2 weeks off and go and play with my grandchildren. But I didn't do that. So I'm going to have to do it now, right? When I don't have the energy or the physical well-being. So I'm willing to do what other people are not willing to do.
Well, you
And I do
certainly
it by
don't look
helping people.
ground. You don't look ground down by it. You look, robust. I
Well, I take time when I need to, I mean, I try to exercise, consistently. I try to be careful at what I put in my body. I found as I've gotten older, I had to be a little more careful at what I eat. I try to get a decent amount of sleep. Um, but I also this is my second marriage, and my wife is my law partner, and I'm cognizant of the fact that when you get married or you're in a relationship with someone, you don't say, well, I'm married now, so I don't have to make the effort. I don't have to take my wife out on a date. right? I don't have to do the little things like, cleaning the dinner table or taking out the garbage, right? I do those things because the marriage needs constant work. It needs constant nurturing. My wife, needs to know that that I still love her and I care about her, right? And she reciprocates. So I try to make time. Like Wednesday night, I take my wife out on a date, right? Saturday night, I take my wife out on a date. So I do those little things, but because she knows me and accepts me, she knows if the phone rings, right, late at night, that I might get up and take that phone call because there's an opportunity to help somebody. So it works. But I'm a work in progress, and sometimes she has to, rein me in a little.
We're all a work in progress, Mark.
I know, right? So it works, and I'm trying to be a little bit better every day. And I also have two stepchildren, so I've had to learn to be a stepfather. And that, it's been 2.5 years now since my wife and I got married. And so that, again, I've had to learn to develop a new skill set. And, I have a different relationship with my stepson as I do to my stepdaughter. And that's been a very interesting experience. And I've had to learn to be a parent to a certain extent. And again, that's been a work in progress. And I wasn't always a good step parent. So I think I'm better now than I was 2.5 years ago. So, and again, I've made some mistakes along the way and I've had to learn from that. So I think you have to be willing to make mistakes and learn, but also take responsibility for your failures and successes.
Yeah, amazing. Wow, what a fascinating story you have. It's like I when I'm listening to you, what I'm hearing is you've had this kind of not giving up thing running through it. And then you've gone through a whole series of different experiences along the way. And then you sort of fell into working with this guy where you got this really strong input on the personal development side just when you needed it, is how it sounds.
Yeah. I mean, one of the things, the crazy things I did was, so after I got divorced in, what was it, 2003, I had wanted to go back to school for a really long time and get a master's in law. And I had a pretty successful law practice with a friend of mine, and we'd actually gotten married 6 weeks apart. He's still married, and I was divorced a year later after I got married. And I said to him, I'm going back to school. He said, well, but we have a great practice. I said, I don't want to do this. I need this year. I want to go back to school. And I did. And I tapped into my savings. I moved up to Washington, D.C. And while I was back in school, I also worked on a presidential campaign. I'd had a passion for politics. I took a whole year off. I worked on a presidential campaign and I started off as a volunteer and I ended up as part of the legal team. And it was an amazing year. And I said, hey, if this guy wins, I'm going to go work in the White House. Well, he didn't win. So, but here I was a year later. I got my master's in law. I'd worked on a presidential campaign, and it was just part of my journey. But obviously, had my candidate won, I think my life would have taken again. It would have gone in a different direction. So, here it is. I mean, I tried different things to try and find purpose. Um, it's been quite the journey. When I look back, people say to me, "Well, you've had a very interesting life." I mean, and yes, but when I started my law firm, which I started out of the local library here in February of 16 because I was broke, I also lost my dad 11 months unexpectedly, and I had to scramble to find the money to pay for a funeral. So, it's been a journey for me, but I look back on those experiences and I tap into those and I use those as motivation. And I say, I'm not going to go back and be broke. I'm just not going to do it. And I'm going to make enough money. And for the first 7 years, I was able to take care of my mom financially to support her. So I've tried to use all of those experiences to be better at everything, you know, um, and not cry about things. And when I do, and occasionally I do, I slip back. My wife is there to motivate me. Okay. Right. She's really the yin to my yang. So I'm very blessed to have a good partner. And as my father used to tell me, the right partner is a game changer, both personally and professionally. So my wife's amazing. She really is. So she's a
Amazing.
beautiful spirit.
Well, I'm glad you said that because she'll probably watch this episode at some point. So she needs to hear that. So
Listen, Catherine, I've been very vocal about the fact that I couldn't, that I would never, I would not have been successful, or should I say, as successful without my wife. Right? I mean, she was my partner business-wise before I committed to her personally. That side of my life, in terms of taking responsibility, took a little bit longer. You know, to fulfill. But without her, I don't think I wouldn't be the man I am today, both personally and professionally. So I owe a big debt of gratitude to her. So
Amazing. I love how you've at different points you haven't. It sounds like you haven't accepted necessarily the way things seem inevitably that they're going to go. You know, you've stopped and gone, well, what if I don't want to go in that direction? What if I want to try something different? And I think that's a really important aspect of if somebody wants to be someone who doesn't give up. You know, it's not just you're not just being a bull, just smashing down walls indiscriminately. You're using a bit of judgment and responsibility around how you do that. And obviously that evolves over your life.
yeah, there was I've read different books and stuff. What was a saying? One of the sayings I saw it was if you're what was the saying? If you're tired of starting over, stop giving up. Right.
Could
Because
you
every
say that
time,
again? Could you say that again a bit more slowly? Because that's
yeah,
a really strong thing.
if you're tired of starting over, stop giving up.
Yes.
Right. What was it Winston Churchill said? If you're going through hell, keep going. So Winston, what an amazing man. What was the other thing he said? Um, if you've got enemies, good. It means you stood up for something.
It's
Right. So, I mean, I've read a lot of books or I've listened to audiobooks about, those types of things. And I think you constantly have to be inspiring yourself, right? I mean, it's like exercise and you have to keep doing it. So I try to keep working on my mindset as well, when I have those moments. And listen, we all feel like, there are times when I get up and I'm like, oh my God, I don't want to do this today. I don't want to do this today. And so I think you've got to look at other people that are inspirational. So I don't know if you're familiar with who Alexander Usyk is. Alexander Usyk is a Ukrainian boxer. He was the undisputed cruiserweight champion of the world. Then he became, undisputed heavyweight champion of the world. And he's a deeply religious guy, loves his family. And they said to him, they were asking, they said, you spend a lot of time, training and working on your craft. He's like, are there ever days where you don't feel like doing it? Don't feel like getting out of bed. You just would rather hang out with your kids. He said, yeah, of course. And so the interviewer said, well, why do you do it? You know, what motivates you? He said, it's not motivation, it's discipline. He said, and there's a difference. Motivation is, I do it when I feel like it. Discipline is, I do it even when I don't feel like doing it. I do it anyway, right? It's not a matter of, am I motivated? It's, I'm going to do it, right? So, like for instance, this morning I got up and I knew I was going to work out this exercise this morning. Did I feel like doing it? No, I really didn't. I'd rather sit in front of the TV and have a cup of coffee. But I did it anyway because I know how I'm going to feel later if I don't do it, right? So, so to a certain extent, I try to run my life, with discipline. I do a lot of social media posts. So instead of sitting in front of the TV in the morning watching the news, I get in front of my laptop, I have my coffee with me, and I go through what I want to talk about. I write the posts, I shoot my videos, and it's done. It's just discipline. I don't always feel like doing it, but I do it anyway, right? So doing things when you don't feel like doing them, I think in large part, again, it's part of just the motivation. That's not the right word. It's part of the way I get to where I need to be, right? I do things that I don't want to do, and even when I don't want to do them because they need to get done, right? So again, it all comes down to that inner drive. I'm going to do it anyway, even when I don't feel like doing it. And if I don't feel like doing it, then I'm going to have somebody else do it for me, right? There's the book, Who Not How, right? So for instance, like, one of the things we're trying to do is we're trying to get in front of more people, do a lot of more public speaking. We have just hired a brand new staff member who's going to help me with that. I don't feel like, bagging out 300 emails to the bar associations. I did that last year and it helped. So I've got somebody now who's going to help do it for me. It's going to get done. It needs to get done if we're going to grow my business and I'm going to help more people. So I'm constantly thinking about this stuff and I think it's fair to say I'm obsessed with it. I don't think you can be successful without a little bit of obsession. And I don't think that's a bad thing. So,
Well, I'm inspired listening to you, and
I-
because I'll tell you the truth. I've been slacking a bit lately with exercise. And I know I need to get back into it properly. And listening to you, I feel like all I need to do now is rerun this episode when I next want to goof off, because that will get me back on track. Because the energy you're expressing, this strong, determined energy, but very much mixed in with being discriminating about where you're putting your energy. You're not just throwing yourself at the wall repeatedly in the hope that effort on its own is going to get the result. You're doing it in the way that you've worked out is relevant to what you're trying to accomplish, which I think is a very, very important distinction.
Yeah, I mean, it's like anything, it's like this morning I was talking to my wife about, certain aspects of the business. We're constantly talking about like analyzing stuff, and it's like sometimes like in the morning I'll step on the scales, right? Am I gaining weight? Am I losing weight? Is my weight staying the same? How do my pants fit, right? So, or trousers, I should say, right? I'm constantly analyzing things, right? Am I eating badly or am I eating good? So I'm constantly trying to figure things out to figure out if we can do them better. So you have to be moving forward a little bit, because if you're standing still, other people are passing you by. So I mean, even when you don't feel like exercising, nobody says you have to go out there and kill yourself. But even if you just go for a walk, right? I think you say, okay, I didn't run the marathon today, but I went for a walk. I kept moving forward, albeit a little slower today, but I moved forward. I think that's important. You don't always have to be going at 100%. I might go at 70%, but at least I'm moving. Tomorrow I'm 100%. I needed to back off a little bit. So,
Beautiful. Love it. So how did you get into this particular niche of working with clients who have family members or friends or loved ones who have fallen prey to addiction or mental health problems?
yeah, so when I was working for that company down in Miami, one of the things they would teach the lawyers is really, really focusing on who you want to help, right? I mean, you I think it's very difficult to be quote a generalist. When I- and perhaps not because I've had that education. I see lawyers who do, they do personal injury, they do criminal defense, they do immigration, they do this, they do that. It's like being a black belt in 10 different martial arts. You can't be a master of 10 different things. You can be a master of one, maybe two. After that, you know a little about a lot of stuff, and not, and not a lot about one thing. So it's really about focusing. Who do you want to help? And when I sat down and thought about who I wanted to help, I realized I had close family members and friends who had these types of issues. And I looked online, there was not a law firm out there that had really built a business around helping this one group of people. At the time there were two lawyers who were dabbling in it, and they had a bit of a monopoly on it. And there was a guy south of me and a guy north of me. The guy south didn't go north, the guy north didn't go south, and they didn't talk. They didn't. There was nothing online about what they were doing. Right? They kept it quiet. Why? Because they were making a lot of money out of it, and they didn't want anybody to know. So one of the things I started to do when I opened up the business was I started posting videos. I mean, it was free marketing for me because it doesn't cost anything to make a video and put it on Facebook. Well, that really rubbed the guy south down. That rubbed him the wrong way, and he went and registered the fictitious name to my website and started to send me threatening emails. You know, I'm going to shut you down. Ba 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 ba. And I said, give it your best shot. Either shut up or put up. And so I sort of rattled the cage, right? I changed the conversation, and we were getting people calling and saying, "Oh, I read about what you do. And, how comes, what are all these brand new laws?" These aren't brand new laws. They've been on the books for 35, 40 years, but no one's talking about it because these two schmoes are making too much money out of it. So they didn't want to tell anybody, right?
What
They
are
were,
these special law? What are these special
well,
laws?
so the main law is the Marchman Act, which is a statute that's unique to Florida and allows us to put people into treatment for 3 months at a time when there's a primary substance use disorder, drug use, right? And, these days we operate under three laws: Marchman Act, Guardianship, and Baker Act. And, you know, we really are masters of all three of those statutes. And occasionally we work with a family who has a loved one that's been arrested. Well, having been a prosecutor and a criminal defense lawyer, I understand how those two worlds, if used properly, can work well together. I don't take criminal cases anymore. I refer them to a colleague. But understanding those, how the criminal arena works, how those three statute works, I think makes us completely different from every other law firm, right? I mean, there's no, with all due respects to some of my colleagues who have now come along and tried to copy us, there's nobody that has the skill set that we do. My wife wrote the book on how to use guardianship for behavioral health. You know, all those other lawyers that are trying to do it now, they learn from my wife. She's a genius with guardianship. She's got unmatched experience. She's brilliant with it. And so I think that's what makes us different. But, you know, there's a lot of people out there that need help. So I can't help all of them. So I don't have an issue with other lawyers doing it. But the inspiration was really close family members and friends. And so when it comes to the Baker Act, and I'm going to explain that a little bit. So every state has a version of the Baker Act, and even England has, you know, the UK has a version, and it's basically where somebody's experiencing a mental health crisis, and the state steps in and takes custody of them. So we'll pick up the phone. This person's suicidal. I need the police around here right now. We got to get them to a place of safety. So I'd heard of that statute. And then 2 days after I buried my father, I had a family member that was Baker Acted. Then COVID came along, and other lawyers started calling us and saying, hey, our clients are getting Baker Acted. We don't know what to do with, we can't get them out, right? Then again, nobody had built a law firm handling those kinds of cases. And I said, hold on a second, there's got to be a way to do this, right? And I figured it out. And so I would say that every year we file about 300 cases a year, getting people out of the Baker Act, which is Florida's mental health system. I would say that I'm probably the state's leading expert on the Baker Act at this point. So again, you know, working with families, people get Baker Acted. And sometimes if you use it correctly, it can be a life-saving tool, but you got to know how to use it. So again, you know, it's that real world experience. When it's happened to me, I know what it feels like. I know how to use it, right? And sometimes somebody could be in the criminal justice system, they get out of jail and they get Baker Acted. So again, how does the criminal world and the civil world and the, you know, and the state's role, how does it all work together? How do we use those systems to get the best result? Right. So, you know, so again, it's about niching down because it's all really about behavioral health. And so I've been willing to, you know, if I didn't understand how a statute worked, I went online and I read the darn thing. Okay, I see how this works now. Let's figure it out. And I've been willing to try different stuff. And, you know, there's a reason they call it the practice of law, Catherine. It's because, like anything, right? The more you do it, the better you get at it. So again, you know, my two associates that we hired, both those lawyers came from the government world and working in that arena, understanding how it works. So, you know, I've built the business around everything that we do, right? I'm not hiring people that don't buy into the mission of helping people, but two, understand what we do and don't have the experience. So, you know, it's a constant work in progress. We're constantly tweaking the thing. How do we do it better? How do we help more people? How do we give the clients that we have right now a better experience with us? How do we make it least stressful as we possibly can? Because going to court and potentially testifying against your adult child is stressful. So I get it. So it's like a child that needs constant nurturing or it goes sideways.
Yeah, well, I think it's wonderful what you're doing because am I right in saying that there's been a real increase in the number of people with suffering from these sort of issues, and then of course families don't know how to deal with it. They're heartbroken, and so they need support.
I,
Go on.
well, I was going to say, I think the number one crisis that we're going to face probably as a country is mental health. I mean, 40 of the 50 states have now legalized marijuana in one form or another. We are being inundated with calls from parents who have adult children who are experiencing psychosis and hallucinations and delusions and schizophrenia. And it's all being fueled by this new, quote, legal marijuana, which is significantly more potent than the marijuana that I was aware of when I grew up in the UK as a child of the 80s. This stuff is dangerous and it damages brains permanently. And you know, so I think that's the big crisis that we're going to face for the foreseeable future until we get a grip on this. But you know, legalized marijuana is not going away any more than, you know, alcohol is going to go away. and the states are making too much money off of it. So they don't want to rein it in, but they're going to have to spend that money on helping people who have mental health issues now. So, causes have effects and effects have consequences. And this is the consequence.
Yeah. Yeah. Wow. Well, I had heard that there were these new strains of marijuana that had been kind of chemically enhanced so that they became dangerously strong. But I'd also heard that marijuana is also used medicinally in a beneficial way as well. So does that make the whole thing more complicated to deal with?
I think it does. I mean, some of the states have legalized it for, medicinal purposes. Others have legalized it for both medicinal and recreational. So I think it does. I mean, is there evidence that marijuana can have a beneficial effect medicinally? I think that there is. I think that there is. But, the problem is that it's so easy to get that card for medicinal purposes. You go to the doctor, doc, I'm suffering from really bad anxiety. Okay, here's a prescription for marijuana. Now you go down to the local, smoke shop, you get yourself whatever you want to get yourself. And, now we have this issue, right? Of psychosis and all these other fun things. So is it really for medicinal, or are we really circumventing the whole intent here, which is just to make marijuana legal for everybody? And it's really just a recreational drug, which is fine. But then let's not say, well, it's just medicinal. It's for anxiety, because that's just being dishonest. To be honest with you, just say, listen, the state's broke. We need the money. We're going to legalize it. Okay, fine, but just understand what the consequences of that are, because you're going to be dealing with a whole population of people who are suffering from mental health issues. Do you have the money to treat them? Because these people are going to miss work. They're not going to show up to school. They're going to drive high and cause accidents.
Yeah. Well, that's interesting. So you've got clients whose children are suffering from problems through taking marijuana. I've
Yeah.
never heard of that before. I've heard of it in relation to Class A drugs and things like that, but never in relation to marijuana. So that's a new thing for me to understand.
Yeah, I'd be interested to see if that's happening in the UK. I mean, we also have now kratom, which is, one of these drugs that you can buy in gas stations.
Yeah.
And, turns out that, again, kratom in its purest form, I believe, has medicinal purposes. But the stuff you're buying at a gas station, is sold as sort of a herbal supplement, but it has, drug-like qualities. And the kids are hallucinating and becoming delusional and psychotic and all kinds of crazy stuff, and it's completely unregulated.
Well, I suppose the thing is you can mess up your entire system just by, I don't know, eating too many carrots. Almost anything can be toxic to the system if you're taking too much of it or taking it in the wrong way or in relationship to the wrong metabolic setup in your body. So it sounds to me like what we've got is a situation where people are toxic in their body through whatever specific thing it may be or whatever general thing it may be, but they're not coping with it, managing it. They're not managing it properly, and their family don't know how to help them. Is that right?
Well, I think here's the problem. I mean, you'd have to have, I mean, I guess if you ate too many carrots, you'd be running to the bathroom.
You can
But
actually apparently kill yourself by eating too many carrots by throwing something completely out of balance. I mean, it's an extreme, ridiculous example, but
okay, I'll have to remember that one but I hear what you're saying. I appreciate uh, I appreciate what you're saying.
Mm,
Um, but I think with marijuana and things like kratom, I mean, we're really talking about damaging the brain and dysregulating the brain. And it's like having your car and your engine's out of tune. The whole car runs horribly because the engine's out of tune. So that's what's happening, right? Untuning your brain, and now everything else is not working properly.
mm. Which is very, very sad. So when you work with these families, this $600,000 question, does it help them to find a resolution where everybody is, I'll use the word balance, even though you just completely, what's the word? You disproved the word balance earlier in the conversation, but Do you find families are then more able to come back into a state of resolution as a result of the work that you're doing for them?
Yeah, I mean, so it's about getting somebody. They're not capable of making the decision for themselves. It's almost as if, their mind has been hijacked. So what we're talking about is empowering the family to be able to make the decision their loved one cannot make, which is, going to treatment, taking medications, those types of things. But recovery um, is a journey. It's not a destination. So especially when someone's experiencing psychosis or, they're delusional or paranoid because of things like marijuana, it takes time. It takes time for the treatment to take effect, right? It's not like go to treatment for 30 days, you're done. I tell every family this is probably a year-long journey. You don't necessarily need me for a year, but they probably got to do 3 to 6 months of treatment and then work what we call a continuum of care, right? They go live in a recovery residence. They get a sponsor. They continue to take their medications, right? They continue with outpatient services. They continue to work the program so they can maintain recovery. And that normally takes about a year. And I mean, statistically speaking, if you can keep somebody in recovery for a year, there's a 70% chance they're able to maintain recovery for the rest of their life. If you get to 5 years, it's 83%. So that first year is really the key to everything, right? You can't go 6 months and then expect them to be good for the rest of their life. It just, statistically speaking, doesn't work that way. So yes, we can help them, and I always tell every family, I've got a magic wand. Problem is you probably won't see the benefits, or at least for 3 to 6 months. And then a year from now, it really takes hold. So, it's about when we speak to families, about laying out what do things look like? Because it's not a quick fix. And if you're looking for a quick fix, I'm not the right lawyer for you. If somebody's told you they can do it quickly, you got the wrong guy. It doesn't work that way. And the statistics aside, we just know from experience it's probably a year-long journey. And if you can work the program for the year, then there's an opportunity here for a lifetime of recovery. Surely that 1 year is worth it, for them to experience and the family to experience 40, 50 years of recovery. Because otherwise it just continues. And, I think one of the hardest, maybe the most frustrating part of what we do, Catherine, is speaking to families who have been dealing with this for years and years and years, and they cannot make the decision, the commitment to save their loved one. And I know there's a strong psychological component to that, but it's frustrating. It's sad. And I think I've come to the realization, we're not going to be able to save everybody. It just doesn't work that way. Some people will never make the decision or the commitment to save a loved one, and they sometimes suffer tragic consequences as a result.
Wow, very
It is what
sad.
it is. It is sad, but I can't make the decision for them.
No. And you can't do everything for them either. I mean, these programs you're talking about, presumably they have other kinds of support within the programs to help them
Yes.
work with
And
the
that's an
psychological
important part of the
aspects.
recovery process
Yeah.
is getting the family to do their own work too.
Yeah.
Because most of the time the family's been traumatized, but they've been living in this for so long, they don't know any other way to live. This is normal for them. This is status quo. Chaos is normal for them. And everything else is frightening.
Wow. Well, I'm delighted you're out there doing this. And I completely hear what you say about specializing because, as you say, you've dived deep into all these different acts and these different ways of dealing with it. And you've got all this experience and practice working with people. So, salut, sir, respect. I think it's fantastic what you're doing. And, anyone else who's watching this who is in the legal profession and has clients in this sort of situation, can they contact you and ask for your advice?
They can. And the other thing, Catherine, I would tell you is that, I've put a couple of lawyers into treatment. My profession is, they say that lawyers are twice as likely to develop some type of behavioral health issue as non-lawyers. So that's a problem. So I've put lawyers into treatment. I've represented some lawyers. I had them as clients. And I also speak to legal groups, lawyer groups, and I tell them, listen, if you need help, right, I can help you to get help. I can give you resources. And normally, every time I say that, somebody comes up to me at the end of of a conversation, of a speech, and says, "I need help." So, so that's my own profession is not immune to these things.
Mm.
So it's not just if you're a lawyer out there and you have a client that needs help, would you call us? But if you are a lawyer out there and you need help personally, or you've got a family member that needs help, I'd like to have the conversation with you. So thank you for that, Catherine.
My pleasure. Well, I'm just going to remind everybody where to find you, which is mentalhealthaddictionlawfirm.com. And that will be in the show notes as well. So just a couple of things before we wind up, before we run out of time. There are some of the people listening to this conversation right now are also out there on their mission, on their path, doing their best to help. Is there something you'd like to say in particular to those people in relation to some of the themes we've talked about today?
Well, I think a couple of things. Number one, I think the key to success is not giving up. Number two, I think you got to be willing to try different things in terms of, well, different marketing things. Well, I'm going to do this or I'm going to do that, and not being afraid to fail at it. As an example, several years ago, I got talked into doing TV. Financially, it almost broke me. But I learned a very, very valuable lesson, which was, at least for me, TV doesn't work. So, but if I hadn't have tried it, I wouldn't have learned anything from it. So be willing to try different things and say, okay, that didn't work. Now I know that that's not an avenue for me. So I'm going to try something different. So I think sometimes the key to success is being willing to fail at certain things. And I think that maybe the third thing is surrounding yourself, with people who are supportive. It doesn't have to be employees, but family members, friends, right? Who believe in you. And I will tell you, as our business has grown, Catherine, we've become more successful. I would say that our circle of friends has shrunk dramatically, because some of the friends that, were there when when I was down and out, turned out they liked it when I was down and out because it made them feel better about themselves. Now I've become successful. Turns out they didn't have my best interests at heart, because deep down, they weren't willing to do the work that I did, right? They weren't willing to take responsibility for their successes and failures, and would rather sit on the floor and blame everybody else. And now I'm the bad guy because I've been successful. So, I try to be careful about who I share my vision of the future with. Who do I share my journey with, right? It's only with people that are supportive. And so I don't share everything with everybody. And that's a hard lesson I've had to learn, because it turned out that some of my closest friends were really envious and jealous, and were not wishing me success. They were hoping I would fail, because then that would make them feel better about themselves, right? So be careful who you share your mission and your goals with, because not everybody has your best interest at heart. Some people would rather see you fail, because that makes them feel better. Instead of them raising their game so they feel better about themselves, they'd rather you lowered your game so they could feel better about themselves.
Yeah, wise words. And final question. We've talked about a lot today. It's been absolutely fascinating, actually very touching, a lot of it. Has there been a favorite part of our conversation for you today?
Has there been a favorite part? Well, I have to tell you, I've really enjoyed my time with you. It's such a pleasure. I don't know, you have this wonderful uh, energy about you. But I think what's good, a lot of the time, I do a podcast, and I love doing podcasts. People, they want me to sort of walk through, like, tell me about the legal stuff, right? Which is great. Um, but I think for me, the more important thing is my journey. How did I get here? And it's been a long journey for me. And for me, I enjoy sharing that, because I think that at the end of the day, the goal is to try and hopefully lift some people up, so that they say, if this lawyer is sitting in Florida, who's, with that weird accent and a receding hairline, if he can do it, maybe there's hope for me, right? And I think it's about encouraging other people, right? Because that's how you lift a society up, encouraging people to go out there and fulfill their goals, not keeping them down. And I don't like to get political, but and it doesn't matter what your political affiliation is, but at the end of the day, you're responsible for your own successes and failures. Right. And I tell my wife, stop watching the news, because whoever's in power, whoever the president is, whoever's in Congress, at the end of the day, they're not responsible for my successes and failures. Donald Trump's not going to make me more or less successful. Joe Biden didn't make me more or less successful. My business grew when Joe Biden was the president. It's growing when Donald Trump's the president. They're not responsible for my successes or failures. They're not. I am. So
Beautiful.
it's up to me.
Thank you so much, Mark. It's been such a pleasure. I've really enjoyed my time with you as well.
Thank you,
And
Catherine.
thank you, everybody, for watching and listening. Do check out Mark's website and do reach out to him if that's relevant for you. And if you are somebody who is wanting to step deeper into your own calling and bring it more to life, then check out the link for the clarity call with me in the show notes. Thank you.